Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the conference part of the Global Apparel Sourcing Expo, organized by the IF together with its partners, ForSource and Sourcing Journal. The Global Apparel Sourcing Expo is the first digital exposition that the IF is organizing and is bringing together manufacturers from all over the world, from all continents, together with buyers from all over the world. The IF is the International Apparel Federation, uniting industry associations from across all continents, uniting them for the mission of creating stronger, smarter, and more sustainable supply chains. My name is Matthijs Krité, and I'm Secretary General of the IF. Now, part of the Global Apparel Sourcing Expo, as we said, is the conference. The conference we have cut into 4 components, each component discussing a major topic in the apparel industry. We are talking about sustainability, we're talking about innovation, digitization, and we are talking about sourcing trends, global sourcing trends. And therefore today we are very lucky to have with us Dr. Christian Schindler, Secretary General of the ITMF, the International Textile Manufacturers Federation. And I think this is very good to have the textile knowledge with us here, because a lot of the developments that are taking place in the apparel industry obviously are created, a lot of the circumstances are created by the circumstances in the textile industry and vice versa. Now, the ITMF is known for its very strong research, its own authentic research on developments, and I think this is an excellent opportunity for us in the apparel industry to learn from that. Now, from your for your talk today, you have chosen the title "Investments in the Global Textile Industry: Yesterday and Tomorrow." So you're comparing the past and the future. Do you see a certain development in the past that allows to forecast certain patterns in the future?
Well, first of all, Matthijs, thank you very much for having me to have a possibility to share our perspective from the ITMF perspective on sourcing and, of course, on developments. I chose this title of my presentation because we are looking at investments in the textile value chain since more than 40 years now already. And of course, with such a long history of data in the past, this allows you to look also to a certain extent into the future, especially in times like these. And today I brought as a first slide a slide from our International Textile Machinery Shipment statistics. This shows the last 10 years of shipped large circular knitting machines. And I just want to highlight 2 major observations. Obviously, that the bulk of new circular knitting machines is going to Asia. It's around 90%. It went down a little bit from 92% in 2010, just after the world financial crisis, and last year it was around 86%. The second information that is very important on this slide is the one on China's share of investments in these circular knitting machines. And as you can see also on top of the graph, China's share decreased from 77% in 2010 to around 50% in 2019. So there's a small trend to be observed. One is that the share of investments into Asia is coming down, but very slowly from a very high level. And that the share of China, the global share, is also coming down from almost 3/4, more than 3/4 actually in 2010 to now 50%. So every second machine that was shipped last year was actually installed eventually in China. So this is a very important message that shifts are not happening very quickly in the textile value chain. And there are different reasons for that we are going to discuss maybe in the course of this interview.
Thank you, Christian. That's highly interesting. And it goes to show that it's important to have these kind of statistics available, especially if you have been collecting them for a long time. You can really see the trends. Now, one of the authentic research that ITMF does that I was referring to is called the International Textile Machinery Shipment Statistics. So can you expand on those a little bit more? And again, the same question, how can you connect the past to the future?
Yes, I have prepared 2 slides. Let's start with the first one, and then I will shortly explain what we do with the statistics. Maybe a few words about this statistics. This is the statistics we started in the 70s. So basically, we are asking the major producers of textile machinery in all the relevant textile segments, spinning, in texturing, in weaving, in knitting, and since a few years also in finishing, to which country the new machines have been shipped in the past year. And we do that, as I said, since 40 years. And of course, it shows you where investments are going and where future production will take place. And without showing all the data on all the different segments, I'm just going to highlight 2. I have shown already the one on circular knitting. Now I thought I show the ones on short staple spindles. Go back one. For short staple spindles. So for spinning, you can see that last year in 2019, 3.6 million spindles went to China. And a distant second investor, largest investor, was India with around 1 million spindles, followed by Uzbekistan with 500,000 spindles, and Vietnam, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and so on. So what I want to share with the participants of this conference is that China is a dominant investor in short staple spinning spindles, but this would also be true for open end rotors and other technology. And now the next slide, Matthias, please. This is also true for shuttleless looms, so the modern type of looms, the fast speed looms. You can see that 96,000 looms have been shipped from producers around the world, including Chinese producers, to China, followed by India with only, in brackets, 16,000 spindles, shuttleless looms. So again, a distant second to China. There's a specific reason for this big distance between the largest and the second largest investor, which are the water jet looms in China. As most people know, China is by far the largest producer of synthetic fibers, both short staple fibers, but also filaments. And those filaments especially can be woven with water jet looms because there are no problems with water when you are weaving synthetic filaments. And the water jet looms are the cheapest kind of looms that you can invest in, and therefore we saw a big surge of investments in water jet looms in the last 2 years, actually, again, which can be explained by the fact that the Chinese government asked their industry to relocate much of their production to new areas where new machines were necessary, and therefore we saw the surge of investments also in water jet looms, which make the bulk of this 96,000 looms. So what do I want to say? I want to say that China was the biggest investor, not only in 2019, as you could see in the first slide when we looked at circular knitting machines, but also in spinning, in weaving, and also in draw texturing and in finishing for the last literally 15 years. So in summary, China has created a universe of textile production that is second to none. It's just simply the largest cluster of textile and for textile production in the world that is bringing a lot of advantages to China, and that can not be replaced very easily or very quickly by anyone for different reasons. Maybe I want to quickly list one or two. One, they are also the largest producers of fibers, both or especially synthetic fibers, but also cellulosic fibers. A large producer of cotton, and therefore really have a big advantage when it already comes to the fiber stage. And having produced or having created this huge cluster of producers of textiles of all sorts, they are destined to be and to remain a large producer for in the future also, not only for the export markets, but also, and that's the second reason, for their domestic market. It's a fast growing market with a large middle class that is growing year by year in the millions, that is creating a lot of demand that needs to be met by the producers. Therefore, the attractiveness of the Chinese market for domestic production is incredibly high, especially in times like these, where it's very difficult to export anything with the demand shock experienced after the Corona pandemic.
Great. Thank you very much, Christian. And I'm trying to picture 96,000 looms. I think that's a good exercise. And also looking at the charts that you show is I think a good exercise for anybody in our industry to really feel the dominance of this one country in this industry. What I also find interesting is, although much lower numbers, but the third position for Bangladesh, which is, of course, in apparel industry known mostly as a apparel manufacturing country, but you can see the rise in investments in the downstream industry in that country as well shine through the figures. So that is actually also my question to you, having seen a lot of the statistics from the textile industry. What, in your view, if you look downstream, is the situation in the apparel industry? What is your view and the outlook there?
Well, the difference between the apparel industry and the textile industry is that investments in textile production is much more expensive and much more difficult. Obviously, it's much easier to relocate or to invest in sewing machines and put up a garment factory in any country around the world, as long as you have sewing machines. As I said, it's easy to get and to relocate or to buy, and if you have the labor force.
Yeah.
And in many countries you have that. It's interesting to observe that while many countries try to build a textile apparel value chain, starting, let's say, from spinning, not necessarily from fiber production, but let's say from spinning onwards, that you observe two phenomena. One is that you have very often countries, and Bangladesh is one example, for example, or Vietnam for that matter, or also Uzbekistan, which we saw in one of the slides, where you have big investments in spinning. And we all know that these countries, especially Vietnam and Bangladesh, also have huge investments in apparel production.
Yeah.
And you wonder, okay, well, if they invest so much in spinning, well, wouldn't they also invest that much in knitting, in weaving, and in finishing? And there you see that this is not happening at the same level. The reason for this imbalance or lack of investments in especially weaving and finishing is that investments are very expensive, much more than in apparel or in spinning, and much more complicated, especially in finishing. Finishing, it's a big environmental issue. It's also very complex. You need a lot of expertise. And in many countries, you simply don't have that expertise, or it is very expensive, or the size of the production there is too small to compete. So that's why, you know, you can put up a spinning mill somewhere. It's quite expensive, nevertheless, but you know, you can sell the yarn nevertheless to your neighboring country. For Vietnam, this might be China. For Bangladesh, this might be India. You know, where you have a big fabric production capacity, and sell your yarn that you don't need for or in your own country. So in apparel, the situation is really quite different, nevertheless, because you know you can buy all your fabrics from someone, and that's what we have seen during this pandemic. That when the pandemic started in China could not provide many apparel producers around the world with fabrics, and this was a huge problem for anyone who was relying on Chinese fabrics, whether it was in Bangladesh, whether it was in Africa, whether it was in Latin America, for that matter. So if you are an apparel producer in any region around the world that needs fabrics, finished fabrics, you know, and somebody is not in the position to supply you, you are in big trouble, irrespective of the fact that you are very competitive with your garment production and you have put up a very nice garment production facility and maybe even a cluster, possibly like in Latin America, but without the fiber and the fabrics, you know, you can't serve your customers. And that's why the future will be not as much different, you know, as many people talk about now. When you talk about nearshoring or reshoring, you know, you have to think holistically and look at what you actually require, and you require the textile apparel value chain to do that. So one of the solutions, and you observe that in small quantities, is that companies and or buyers in the future will work together to set up their clusters in these regions. This is happening very slowly. More and more retailers and brands will now be forced probably to think more about how they will source their fabrics in the future, or how they will source their fabrics for their garment manufacturing suppliers, and have to consider whether they want to work together in in the long term with their suppliers, helping them to build these capacities in their proximity. So for the Americas, you could imagine that, I don't know, a few brands, work together with some larger, smaller, medium-sized companies to build a cluster of textile and apparel production in Latin America, in Central America. But you can't do that alone.
Yeah, I fully understand, Christian. I think these are the discussions that are going on in our industry. It's about, like you vividly explain, if you don't have the fabrics, you can have a beautiful factory, but nothing is happening there. And I like the collaborative aspect, right? So it can be companies joining together to probably make investments, or even manufacturers together investing upstream in some strategic capabilities like finishing that are sometimes lacking in a supply chain. So actually, this is a very interesting time for strategic discussions about the extent of the supply chain and potential collaboration there. So great answer. Thank you very much. In view of the time, I have one last question. And I know ITMF has also done the so-called ITMF Corona surveys. One of the questions was about the expected turnover in 2020 compared to 2019. So we're, well, I would say a bit anxious almost, but not eager. But what can you tell us about that?
Well, we had asked, and you might want to show the slide. Thank you. Yeah. We had asked both about the cancellations of orders and then also the expected turnover, which have, of course, a correlation. And the answer that turned out to be that, and that was, for the month of June, the latest one, that cancellations reached on average around 40% and expected turnover down 30%. So of course, expected turnover for 2020, meaning that that they were hoping that the second half of 2020 will be, of course, better than the first half of 2020. But minus 30% on average around the world is quite a number, but seems to be very realistic looking at what's happening at the retail level in Europe and especially in the USA. So that's a number that is realistic. Some countries, some companies might be better off than others, but on average, this is what what we have to live with. And the question is really how to survive this year financially. And this is not a year, where you are hoping to make any profit, unless you are in one of the niche markets where you produce masks and PPE products for the health sector. But these are the exceptions of the rule. We also did one more question about the recovery, and that was rather surprising. If I may just quickly add that one.
Yes, please.
Because companies seem to me rather optimistic, but of course, after such a downturn in the first half, you are hoping that this is over soon and it can only get better. And if you want to show the slide, I'm not sure whether I have prepared it. We were asking people, when do you expect business to be at pre-crisis levels? And you can see that the majority, 23 and 21%, expect that to be in the first half of 2021, which I personally think is rather optimistic. I would be more pessimistic or more conservative, whatever you want to call it, and would say, if we are back on pre-crisis level at the end of next year, we are lucky. because uncertainty is so high, unemployment issues are coming to the forefront now, with the pandemic going on in many countries around the world, in many important markets like the US. It's a moving target, the recovery, and we can only hope for the best and prepare ourselves for the future by really looking at our business models and by looking who we work with in a collaborative manner, both on the supplier side and also at the customer side.
Thank you, Christian. I have to say I share your realism based on the talks that we have had in the situation that we are in, with the uncertainty not going down as much as we would like. I like the encouraging words and I agree with it about having to work on the business models, looking in all directions, which means looking also at greater supply chain to make the business more profitable, actually, and in that sense also make it more sustainable. So thank you very much for sharing this with us, giving a good fundament of our thinking based on data and on measurements, combined with strong insights. Thank you very much, Dr. Schindler, for your time and sharing your insights with us.
Thank you, and wishing you the very best for the expo and the conference. Thanks for having me.
Thanks.